Hello everybody, it's Brian for GadgetUnit.com, and in this video I'll be bringing you my video review of the LG G2. This particular model is available for AT&T here in the US as well as some of the other carriers, but for AT&T, if you are interested in picking this phone up, at least at the time of doing this video, it's available for free with a 2-year contract or for $464.99 without a contract, and that full price is actually about $200 off its original launch price back in September. If you want to pay in monthly installments, you can pay 20 monthly payments of $23.25 or 26 monthly payments of $17.88. I would also like to thank AT&T for handing this phone over to me for review. In terms of specs, the phone has a 5.2-inch 1080 by 1920 Full HD IPS display with Gorilla Glass 2, a Qualcomm Snapdragon 800 quad-core processor clocked at 2.26 GHz, a 3000 mAh non-removable battery, unfortunately, 32 GB of internal storage, and also unfortunately there's no micro SD card slot, LTE support, 802.11a b g n AC Wi-Fi with Bluetooth 4, NFC, Android 4.4.2 KitKat, this phone originally launched with Android 4.2.2, a 13 megapixel rear-facing camera that can also record 1080p video at 60 frames per second, which I'm a fan of, and the camera also has optical image stabilization, and the front-facing camera is 2 megapixels and can record 1080p video at 30 frames per second. So while the majority of the phone is made of plastic materials, it still feels very solid in the hand. It can be a bit slippery, especially because the back is made of a glossy plastic. Speaking of the back, it does have sort of a subtle blue carbon fiber-like pattern to it. And overall, I think that the design is a bit dated, but that's not necessarily a bad thing since it's still a classy looking device, although I would recommend a case to help with the grip situation. On the front, we have the 5.2-inch display, the earpiece, some sensors, the front-facing camera, a multicolor LED, as well as the LG logo towards the bottom. There's nothing on the right side, but on the left side we do have the micro SIM tray. At the top of the phone, we do have our IR blaster as well as a top microphone. Lastly, at the bottom, we have our speaker, micro USB port, microphone, and 3.5mm headset jack. Towards the back, where all the fun is, we have our power and volume buttons. This is a sort of a controversial move for LG by taking these buttons and putting them on the back of the phone. For me, at first, it seemed like a deal breaker, but after using these buttons, they actually aren't that bad to use. I would still prefer to have them on the sides of the phone, but really it's not that big of a deal, and I think that the rest of the phone really does make up for this. But on the back, of course, we do have another microphone, an LED flash, as well as our 13 megapixel rear-facing camera. Going over the speaker quality real quick, it's not that bad, but it's also not the greatest. Of course, HTC's One is pretty much the only phone with optical speaker placement, being the front of the phone, so the audio is going straight towards you. But the side of the phone is really the next best thing, while a rear-facing speaker is probably the worst. So audio quality is generally fine, but nothing mind-blowing. It's also not as loud as you'd expect. I was hoping that the volume would be much louder than it is, but really that's not the case. For casual listening and speakerphone calls, I would say that it's fine, but I wouldn't use it for prolonged periods of time. When listening to music, for instance, it's just not that great. The display, though, is really good. The viewing angles are quite good, but could be a little bit better. The colors aren't too saturated and the touch response is just fine. One thing that I immediately noticed is at the side of the display, the bezels are really small, so it really makes the display seem bigger than it actually is, so that's kind of nice. As I mentioned earlier, the phone originally shipped with Android 4.2.2 Jelly Bean, but was updated a couple of months ago for Android 4.4.2 KitKat. Didn't really bring too many changes, but basically LG's skin that they have on top of the G2 isn't that bad. To me, it's not as intrusive as, let's say, the TouchWiz interface from Samsung. You're just not bombarded with features, but you do have plenty of bloatware that fortunately you can disable or at least hide from within the Settings app, and if you go to the app drawer, you will have the option to actually hide them from view. The phone itself does have a number of unique software features, such as Smart Screen, Smart Video, Slide Aside, Q-Slide, as well as Quick Remote. The written review details these a little bit more. So in terms of LG's skin again, it's not the best in terms of design, but I think it's easy and straightforward to use. It does feel a little bit dated compared to what we've been having over the past 3 or 4 years. It would just seem to be good for LG to actually modernize their design just a little bit. Otherwise, it's not that bad. It's fast, it's smooth, it's fluid, and it's, like I said, easy to use. Speaking of how smooth it is, performance across the board to me was quite excellent. I'm pretty critical of speed and the smoothness of software, and the LG G2 really didn't disappoint. So apps loaded quickly and performed well after loading, websites were fast with Chrome, games were generally smooth and looked great on the full HD display, so overall performance was good, other than some inconsistent frame rates among higher-end Android games, but that seems to be typical across all Android smartphones, however. Next up is battery life. I was incredibly satisfied with the G2's battery life. You can easily get through the entire day with moderate to heavy usage, and it'll probably last you through the night because standby times are really good as well, and probably most of the morning. But if you conserve your usage a little bit, your numbers should be a little bit better. Even more, the phone's battery saver mode proved to be pretty beneficial, allowing the phone to last even longer at the expense of performance, but just a little bit. Call quality was just fine. It's really what you would expect from a phone nowadays. Cellular data performance, at least with AT&T here in San Antonio, is a bit of a mixed bag. Some places it's really fast, but most places it's a little bit low, especially compared to how their network performed here a year or two ago. But of course, your performance will vary depending on a wide variety of factors, including location, time of day, congestion, etc. And this is really across all carriers, not just specific to AT&T, but anybody else really. I was pretty impressed with camera quality. Photos looked quite good, especially with HDR mode enabled. There are a number of different scenes and modes to choose from, and you do have a number of typical smartphone camera options to play with, such as ISO and white balance. Video quality was generally good, although there's no tap to focus while you're recording, so the phone sometimes had problems figuring out what to focus on. Audio quality was just fine in quiet areas, but in a loud environment, audio doesn't really sound right, in my opinion. One thing to note is that the phone does have an audio zoom feature, so combining the phone's 3 microphones to pinpoint the audio, depending on what you're actually zooming in on when recording video. And another thing to note is that before you start taking photos or videos, make sure that the lens for the camera is clean and free of any smudges or fingerprints, because that can actually noticeably add sort of a white haze to your photos, so that's just something to keep in mind. Overall, I think that LG did some great things with the G2. It's fast, it looks decent, it has an excellent screen, can take some great photos, and has some top-notch battery life. I originally thought that the new rear button placement would be a deal breaker, but it was honestly something that I got used to fairly quickly. And while I'd still prefer the side buttons, having them on the back isn't that bad, nor is it a deal breaker. LG's Android skin is one of the least intrusive ones, but could use some sort of design refresh. So all told, even several months after its release, I believe I can safely say that the G2 is still an all-around great phone, even compared to the just released flagships by Samsung and HTC. The G2 holds its own, and given the amount of time that's been available, should be had at a lower than launch price, so under $500 that I mentioned earlier. So if you do plan on getting this phone at this point in time, I still believe that you'll be very happy with what you're getting, especially with the camera quality and battery life. If you have any comments, questions, or feedback about this or anything else, feel free to leave those down below in the comments area, but that's it with the video. So thanks a lot for watching, and I'll talk to you all very soon.